Hey everybody, Lewis here from Status Coup, and we have a very big show for you all today. Lots of new breaking information coming out of East Palestine. We also later have Zeynab joining us, who's going to be covering all sorts of things going on with the madness surrounding bills being passed in state houses across the country regarding trans rights and things like this. So Zaina will be talking about that later in the show, regardless of where you stand on that issue. Definitely worth hearing her perspective on it. I know she's been doing a lot of research on this topic at the moment. But I'm going to get into the details a little bit about some of this breaking news that we discovered as a result of a town hall that happened last night in East Palestine. This town hall was put on by River Valley Organizing. Some of you may remember over a month ago at this point, during my first trip to East Palestine, we also covered a different town hall put on by River Valley Organizing. That is really where a lot of the conversation initially got started about dioxins. That was a lot of the first time residents were hearing about this, being able to ask experts about this. At that town hall, we had a brief interview afterwards with Stephen Lester, who was kind of warning folks about the potential risks there. After that happened, that led to a big push and a big cry from residents to ask for dioxin testing to actually start happening. Weeks later, because of that outcry from residents, we saw that action happen, actually. So these sorts of town hall events have been happening here and there. And last night, I was tuned in watching the River Valley Organizing town hall that went on last night. And I have to say that the questions from residents have become very pointed, very sharp. These folks know exactly what they need to be asking for at this point, because unfortunately, it's been almost 2 months since the train derailment on February 3rd. And unfortunately, there are still tons of questions that have been left unanswered at this point. There's a couple main takeaways that I'll give a brief overview of right now of what I think are big takeaways from the event. I'm not going to get into the specifics yet. And in just a minute, I'm also going to be bringing on Jamie Kaza of River Valley Organizing. She's also an East Palestine resident. She's been on the show before. I'm very curious what her main takeaways from the event are. But in general, I mean, during this stream, we're going to get into some of these specifics, including the EPA actually admitting that some of the residential home testing that's being done is inadequate and things are being missed. We also have some more answers surrounding the vent and burn, or the controlled burn, that went on just days after the East Palestine derailment. We learned a little bit more about the decision makers who maybe have been in the room, the role that the EPA played during this. Some of this was new information that was found out during this town hall. So we'll get into some of that, as well as potentially what influenced some of the decision making in the ongoing cleanup effort with the soil that was buried underneath the tracks to begin with. So we'll get into all of those in just a bit here. But first, I want to start with East Palestine resident Jamie, who works with River Valley Organizing. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, sorry about that. Thank you so much for joining us again. I really appreciate it. And is it Jamie Kaza or is it Jamie Wallace? I'm seeing on the bottom.
Oh, wow. It was Jamie Koza. I officially got married on the 19th. It was a week ago Sunday, so I am now Jamie Wallace.
I remember you. Well, congratulations from Status Coup here. We appreciate that. I remember you texting me about that, and I said it, and then I saw on the bottom there Jamie Wallace, and I was like, oh, I wonder what that is. So, well, congratulations on that. First off, one thing that I didn't mention in the intro there, and then we'll get into what your main takeaways were, was initially Norfolk Southern was supposed to be actually at this town hall event. They told you that they would have somebody present. And then from what I understand, the day of, they backed out. Am I correct in understanding that? And I guess, what did they tell you?
Yes. Well, actually, I want to give due props to Ashley McCollum. Mm-hmm. She's a community member in East Palestine. She reached out to me because she had a conversation with Norfolk Southern. She went live with it, and she had Norfolk Southern representative agree to meet her at her house and sit in her house for an hour or so and see if he got sick. Afterwards, he said that he would address the community and talk to the community in regards to the derailment. And he also offered to bring someone from the EPA. So the next day, Ashley asked me to meet at her house, to meet this railroad guy, to sit in her house and see if he got sick. When I arrived, she texted me and said that he canceled. He actually canceled on coming to her house and canceled the meeting. We had already advertised for the meeting, so I called a person's number that I had, Deborah Schur. She's in the EPA. And I said, look, Norfolk Southern had already agreed to bring someone from the EPA. Is someone coming from the EPA? Norfolk Southern just, bailed out. And what she said to me was, what meeting? We didn't know about it. So I said, if you can get someone there, and they did, get someone there for us. So that's kind of how this meeting transpired. And that's why it was kind of so last minute. It was just an opportunity that we couldn't miss.
No, absolutely. And it's yet again another meeting that Norfolk Southern was supposed to be at and decided not to. Unfortunately, that's a pattern that has seemingly continued on here so far throughout this. Before I get to my next question here too, we're just getting started here. If you're just joining us, please press the like button to get this out to more folks. We want to help get this out. There's a ton of information we're going to be going through here today. So regardless of Norfolk Southern not showing up, although it would have been very helpful for them to be there, there were definitely questions that they would have been able to answer probably. I'm not sure if they would have actually done it, but there were questions that they would have been able to answer that nobody else in the room, unfortunately, could answer. But I think that there was a ton of valuable information that was brought to light as a result of this town hall last night. I'm curious from you as an East Palestine resident, as somebody who's been organizing behind this cause with River Valley Organizing, what are your thoughts from the event? What were your main takeaways?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I think that last minute actually worked to our advantage because there was a smaller group that showed up. There was around 30 community members that were present. We also, streamed it live, and we had people submit questions beforehand if they couldn't be there to get their questions answered. Unfortunately, we didn't get to those questions. The mayor and Mark from EPA agreed to answer those in writing, but the conversation, it felt like a conversation. The flow of how things were going, I felt like it would be beneficial even to the people that had submitted questions. So I kind of just let this meeting, take on kind of just a natural format. When I left that meeting, I felt like it was the first time I had been heard. Again, the conversation style, it wasn't just one question standing in a line like you were a number, not a person. It also allowed you to, have those follow-up questions. A lot of times asking a question leads to another question. And we were in, the bigger town halls, you couldn't do that. So I feel like that really was a good tone to have at the meeting, that personal feel. I also felt like I walked away with more genuine answers than I have gotten in any other meeting that has happened since this derailment. And even when I spoke to the EPA privately in another meeting earlier in the week, I said, just tell us what it is, about the illness. I said, even if you would just acknowledge it and say, hey, I get people in town are getting sick, but we don't know why.
Right.
I'd rather have you say nothing than just ignore the fact.
Right.
And that's what I felt they kind of did in this meeting was their, again, genuine answers that, kind of left, it still kind of left some things hanging, but it's given me more answers than I've had so far.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, for the first time, I heard a couple I don't knows as answers from the EPA, which again, it seems crazy that that should be celebrated as a win in some cases, rather than pretending to know or just saying everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. There was definitely some acknowledgement that yes, in fact, people are getting sick. Yes, in fact, these aren't, it's not something that can just be swept under the rug and ignored anymore. This is a reality that is happening now. And it sounds crazy, but at this point, that hasn't happened really from the EPA, from a lot of these organizations at this point. I'm curious, were there any specific pieces of information that you took away from this that really stood out to you, whether it be in answers from the EPA and answers from the mayor, anything that really stood out to you?
Gosh, where do you want me to start?
Wherever you want. I'm curious what your kind of top things are actually.
Okay, let's start with the mayor. I learned a lot of information about the way things happened and some things that are happening now that I didn't know about. We can talk about, the storage of chemicals at the East Palestine Community Park. People were outraged, like how could, someone gave approval for that, and how could the mayor say they could store these chemicals in our park? And what the mayor actually said was, they just kind of did it and I didn't know. He said, I was so busy at incident command and they just took these chemicals to the park. And as soon as I found out, I was like, get that stuff out of there.
Right.
Just that little bit of transparency and saying that, people were like, what is our mayor doing? Right. And when he just put it to us, I mean, that's understandable. That's relatable. If any one of us were handling with this disaster of this magnitude, it's reasonable that he was so busy dealing with incident command and the situation that he didn't even notice it. And once he did.
Right. Was upset about that. And actually, Colin, we do have a clip of that. It's clip number 1 in here, Colin, if you don't mind playing that. It's about a minute long.
Who gave authorization for them to be able to use the park?
I do not know. It wasn't myself. It was a situation that was ongoing, and I think they just sort of did it themselves. And as soon as we found out about it, they weren't up there that long, and we tried to get them the hell out of there. I was very upset. I was in incident command the majority of the time. And as soon as I found out, we had to get them out of there. But yes, I think they sort of just did it themselves.
Yeah, and that's what I wondered. They strong arm and figured that.
Well, it wasn't necessarily strong arm. I just think that everybody that would have made that decision was busy in incident command, and it sort of just, they came in and then we were like, hold up here. So I do want to say it was just socks, and they have done all those testing. So far, the preliminary test, everything looks good. They did all the soil samples all around the edge. They're going to dig up. They're going to put sod down where all the work was tore up and stuff like that.
And it seems like, in hearing from the mayor a couple times during this was like kind of a common theme of like, obviously there was a lot happening very quickly. I'll remind people that East Palestine is a town of 4,500 people. The role of mayor in East Palestine, this isn't a knock against the mayor. This is just how small towns work across America. It's not like a full-time job. So there's a lot happening very quickly. It seems very plausible that what he's saying makes a lot of sense. People showed up in town, they started setting up in the park. That's a good point that you brought up there. That might seem small, but this is the city park in East Palestine. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is a spot that a lot of folks use and enjoy. I saw while I was there. I'm a big. This is kind of an aside. I'm a disc golfer. I see you've got a disc golf course in the park there.
They just put it in.
Right. And unfortunately, I mean, this park is right next to very contaminated streams at this point that we've seen.
Right. We have we have the city pool, we have the playgrounds there, we have a dog park, all of our community events. If we have car shows come into town, 4th of July fireworks. So it's a heavily used park. And, it was a concern to a lot of the residents that this was happening. And the community foundation, I believe, are the ones that put in that little disc golf course. That's another point of transparency that I'd like to talk about at some point with the unity that I want to bring together, with the town, and just having transparency with things, I think, really will bring us together as a community. I feel like at this point, Norfolk Southern is starting to successfully divide us. But we won't get to that right now. We'll keep on the mayor's comments.
Yeah. Just curious, other big takeaways for you after this meeting beyond the park.
The other thing was the Easter egg hunt, which kind of relates to the park.
Yes.
I believe it's called the park board, scheduled an Easter egg hunt on Easter at this toxic waste dump, where they just had these toxins stored. So, a lot of us were outraged. Like, how are you inviting kids into this park? And I guess a lot of people naturally assumed that the mayor was kind of behind this somehow, throwing this event. Again, we found out it was this park recreation board, and two, that this event was going to happen. What the mayor said last night was no. They've advertised for it. The permit's still laying on my desk, and I am not going to sign this permit until all the testing is back on that soil. Again, something very important that needed said to kind of ease people from thinking, that perception of, oh, they're just going to let this happen and no testing has been done.
Right. And that's even, so I must have missed, I've gone through all sorts of different bits and pieces of this hearing. I must have missed that element of this. But so the mayor has the permit on his desk, has not signed it, won't sign it unless the testing is done. Is that correct?
Correct.
Awesome. So that's good news. I wrote an article on the Status Coup Substack the other day for folks who are interested in checking it out. It's substack.statuscoup.com, covering this Easter egg debacle. It seems like small potatoes here, but this is literally children's lives at stake here. Right. Having an Easter egg hunt in the park when you don't have published test results in the park, when there's obviously concern about contamination in the park, considering, as we saw in that clip, the park was used and for facilities and for the kind of socks that they call that they're using to clean up some of these contaminated creeks, where there's still aeration going on to this day near the park entrance. It's definitely a major concern. Did you have any big takeaways from the EPA? I'm curious as well at the hearing.
Yeah, one of the big takeaways and one of my major concerns was the tearing up of these tracks and why they were only tearing up one track at a time and basically putting, the train, which is kind of like a big fan, I guess, on the gases and blowing them back through our town. Once they started digging up the track, even people that weren't sick before started getting sick. And some of our residents started having additional symptoms. We've had several reports now of people with bleeding ears, children and adults. So, I asked about who made that decision and why. And this was kind of a joint answer from the mayor and the EPA. And basically what they said is you wouldn't want all that soil dug up at once. Right. Like if that amount of toxins were going into the air, it would be a lot worse than it is. And they even said that they were going to suggest for the second half of the tracks that they do it in even smaller sections so that not as much of that soil is exposed and not as many residents aren't exposed to the amount of chemicals that are in that dirt. So just hearing that, it gave a different perspective of it's not just to keep the trains running. I still think they should have shut the trains down just for punishment, but that's right. Between us, right, Lewis?
Yes. Yeah. No, and I mean, I think that was a big takeaway for me as well. And we're going to get into that clip later on in the show because there's a couple elements to that I found were interesting as well. One more question for you, if that's okay. And then if there's anything else you'd want to share, happy to let you do so. We heard a little bit of conversation about the initial decision for the vent and burn as well, where it was...
Yeah, I was going to bring that up too.
Yeah, so initially it sounds like there was only one car that was going to be vented and burned in the controlled burn for folks watching. Again, nothing about this burn looked controlled to me at all, or to basically anybody else. Yes. And the decision was ultimately changed at the very last minute, we're learning. I mean, we've kind of known this, but we're getting it kind of confirmed now from both the mayor and from the EPA, where the decision was changed to go from one car to 5. I'm curious, were residents made aware of that at the time at all, or is this just things that we're all kind of finding out together much later, in these last couple weeks?
I didn't know that until the legislative hearing when it was said there. I didn't realize that they had done, the 5 different cars. And one thing I tried to make very apparent in that meeting is that the fire chief did not make this decision alone. Shaw wants to sit up on Capitol Hill and say our fire chief did this. Not sure how the fire chief feels about me. I don't think he loves me a lot, but he's still, part of my family, part of my community. Like a lot of families, we might be dysfunctional, but you're still not going to blame that on one of mine. And I'm sure, as I said in the meeting, that it wasn't our fire chief going, let me see, a bunch of chemicals in a train. Let's blow them up, guys. And I also like that they kind of recognize the fact that, a lot of people were led to believe like this is common practice. This happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
No big deal. Evacuate for the day. We're going to blow these trains up. You guys can come back in. When in fact, it's never happened
mm-hmm.
in the history of the United States in this capacity.
Right.
They may have blown up one propane tanker, as they talked about, but blown up 5 train cars full of chemicals.
Right.
We were a science experiment.
Right.
We're human beings, and we were a science experiment.
No, absolutely, and not just like 5 trains full of chemicals, full of like carcinogens too. I mean,
right? Yeah.
I mean, the unfortunate reality is, while everybody's dealing with these more kind of short-term health effects with the difficulty breathing, nosebleeds, folks getting bronchitis, sore throats, headaches, those are all bad, and none of you all should have to be dealing with that. But what scares me even more is what's going to happen in 5 years, in 10 years down the line,
mm-hmm.
when all of these chemicals that were set on fire in this, train derailment after the fact, and the controlled burn, were spewed off into the air after it got into all of these creeks, after it has the potential to be, getting close to, water supplies and things like this. Again, at this point, they're saying the municipal water is clean and safe. That's all well and good, but it takes time for some of this stuff to seep in. There's absolutely still a potential risk there. That was discussed here tonight, and it sounds like the testing has been stepped up in that regard, which is good to hear. But just because the test is fine today doesn't mean that the test will be fine tomorrow or the next day. So,
and that's kind of it. Right now, we've only had time to focus on the short-term effects because we're still actively being poisoned. Mm-hmm. It hasn't even got to the point where you can think too much about the long-term effects. Mm-hmm. But I also think the reality is kind of setting in for people. I know, last week, actually the week before, I got really sick and we were still at the hotel, and I'm laying in bed throwing up, and I'm just thinking, I want to be home in my own bed. And it was like this reality hit me, kind of like when someone passes away and you go through the motions of the funeral, and but a month later when you pick up that phone to call your dad and he's not there, it's like the reality of it hits you. And it was this kind of reality that hit me in the face that I have all people wish that one day my home would be safe to go to, home to. I don't think it will be. The reality of this really happening, to us, like it just all like hit me like a ton of bricks. And also the reality of I'm going to be fighting this for the rest of my life. Like, I'm 46 years old. Until both of my feet are in the ground, I'm going to be fighting this. These should be the years that I'm, spending sitting on my front porch, sipping my coffee, watching my grandkids play in the yard. That's not going to be the end of my life. And it was also the reality of, what you were saying about the long-term health effects is we're really fighting for our children. When it comes to these long-term health effects that are much worse than the short-term, it's going to affect our kids. In 20 years, let's face it, I'm going to have one foot in the grave loose, like cancer. I'm not saying it's not a big deal, but I was close to death anyways. For my 3-year-old in 20 years from now, she's going to be in the prime of her life. So the fight that we're fighting today is not even for ourselves, it's for our children. And that's kind of, the other thing, that I wanted to mention about this is it's the same thing with our town coming together. I talked a little bit about how I feel like Norfolk has successfully started to divide us, and I'm guilty. Right now, I'm guilty. I apologize to the mayor, and we talked about it. I've tried to reach out to Ashley McKim, who's a local business owner. I love Ashley with all my heart, and I know she has a good heart. And I've said things that I'm not proud of, but I know a lot of people have. Right now, we are not in our right minds. We're doing things that are out of character for us. And if we don't come back together as a community, this is going to destroy us. We can agree to disagree. But the one thing that every single person in town agrees on is the safety of our people, and the safety of our community. So I started a unity council that I've invited various members of different small organizations, small groups that have organized within the community. The mayor agreed to sit on the unity council. I'd like to get a first responder, a business owner. Like I said, we might not agree on everything, but we can do things like, get a set of demands in solidarity. We had one set of demands, but I feel like once they started tearing up these tracks, our demands change. So it doesn't matter if the railroad's just meeting with business owners or Sherrod Brown's only meeting with 7 people from the community. We all have that same message and solidarity. EP Strong is all of EP coming together. It's my community, but it's the mayor's community too. It's Ashley McKim's, community. It's all of our community, and we have got to stand together. We can see now no one else is helping us, so we need to help ourselves.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's very well put. The unfortunate reality that you've seen, and I know countless East Palestine residents that I've talked to are seeing, is that help isn't coming unless you all get out there and make a whole lot of noise to get the attention out there, right, to get the message out.
That's something I talked about too, was the fact that we're being left in the hands of Norfolk Southern. It's almost like this person raped you, now go to them for help. I feel like they're over there playing God. You can be relocated, you can't. It's this 1 mile zone that was originally put up for the area of shrapnel that now they're kind of using as the area of people that got affected by the chemicals. Like, there's just so many different parts of this. It's sometimes mind-boggling. It's almost like you're watching, I know my mom said this, and we watched a lot of the Twilight Zone when we were kids. It's almost like you're in the Twilight Zone. You're like, this can't possibly be the United States of America that we're living in.
That's a good way to put it. That's how I feel when I'm in East Palestine. The last 2 times I've been there, you feel like you're in the Twilight Zone. It doesn't feel real. Colin, we actually have clip number 6 is actually Jamie talking about this a little bit. And then right after that, Jamie, we'll get one last word from you and we'll let you go. But Colin, you can go ahead and play clip 6.
Right. And I also feel like they're being left to determine to kind of play God, saying you can relocate, you can't, you're throwing a fit, so I'm going to give you an extra $1,000. I feel like that's where our government should be stepping in, or possibly the EPA should be saying, this is the zone where people are getting sick, and these are the people that need to be evacuated. I feel like we've been victimized, and now we have to go to that person who victimized us and beg for stuff that they owe us.
I mean, you said it well right there. You said it well a second ago. Any final thoughts, Jamie?
I guess the last thing I'll leave you with is something else I took away from that meeting, Lewis. The 2 residents that said that their urine, one of it tested positive for vinyl chloride. The other resident who, lives closer, her urine actually tested positive for vinyl chloride and benzene. Again, information coming in, we're all being told to get baseline testing. Shelby Walker, who was the one that had the benzene and the vinyl chloride, said that her blood test came back fine. It was the urine.
When I heard that major red flags went off, I do have their contact information now, and we'll be following up with both of those residents who tested positive for vinyl chloride as well as benzene, which again should be a major red flag, as benzene, the was only listed as the cars that were there only had benzene residue. The fact that folks are potentially testing positive for benzene in their urine is a major red flag for me. Jamie, thank you so much,
Lewis. Get your urine tested, and if Lewis's significant other is watching, please tell him to wear a respirator when he's in town, or he's gonna have a redheaded Italian with a big temper all over him. Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you very much. You have a nice night. Appreciate it.
You too.
Again, everybody, that was Jamie, now Wallace, who is just recently married. So congratulations to Jamie. And thank you, Jamie, for coming on again. We're going to, in a second here, go through a whole bunch more of some of these clips from the town hall event covering the EPA admitting that residential air tests are inadequate to detect the relevant chemicals at the right levels. We're going to hear some more information about decisions being made on the vent and burn, as well as some interesting decision-making surrounding the soil cleanup going on right now. But I just want to say on the outset here, number one, please like this video. We need to get this out to more folks. Liking the video is an easy thing you can do to help get that out there. And another big thing here is I've made 2 trips to East Palestine. I'd like to make a 3rd trip to East Palestine, but it's tough to do. What I'm about to go through right now is a whole bunch of news that should be all over the mainstream media. I just did a quick Google search before this while I was chatting with Colin before the live stream, trying to find news stories about last night's town hall, and I couldn't find one when I just did a Google search for East Palestine town hall, March 28th. Couldn't find an article about it at all. There are some big nuggets of information in this that might seem like it's in the weeds, but these are really important. This is the EPA essentially coming out in a couple cases saying, hey, the tests that we're doing aren't necessarily going to, give us all the results that we need to find out. If you want me to be able to get back to East Palestine, if you want Jordan to get back to Flint, which he's planning on doing soon, if you want stories like this to continue to be told by folks who will actually go there, actually put the time in, actually talk to the residents like Jamie, like the wide range of folks that you've seen us talk to here on Status Coup, the only way to be able to do that is by becoming a member, directly supporting us through membership for literally as low as $5 a month. $5 a month. That's all I'm asking for. It's really simple. Skip one beer out on a random night of the week. Skip one cup of coffee at Starbucks or something like that. If you're able to, $5 to $10 a month. You can do more if you want to. StatusCoup.com/join. I can't stress how important it is for you to do that. If you join during the live stream, I will also give a shout out to you. I also see that we had a super chat in here too. That's another thing that you can do. Mika Gelfond gave us a super chat already. I'll read it out just because I want to encourage folks to do that, although I'm having a hard time pulling it up here. Mika Gelfond, thank you for the continued coverage. $20. Thank you, Colin, for doing that for me. I appreciate it. Yeah, so again, those are all different ways that you can support us to be able to make sure this sort of stuff continues to get out there. But let's get into, I just need to find the right tab here. Let's get into the specifics here on the residential air tests. Okay, so at this meeting, a question comes from a resident about the home air tests. There have been tons of questions about the home air tests at this point. And I've done a bunch of digging into this myself. And this is the first time I'm hearing a representative from the EPA actually admit that something is potentially wrong here. Though they do more than admit that something is potentially wrong. They admit that something is wrong here. Colin, you can go ahead and play clip 8, and then I'm also going to talk quite a bit more about this right after that clip.
And when we go into that, real quick, check your text messages.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So, all right. The machines, both the machines that were used in the homes and the machines that are hanging on the telephone poles, they some of those are multi-gas meters where we can see hydrogen chloride and carbon monoxide, a bunch of other gas sensors. But they also have that photoionization detector, which is that volatile organic meter. It goes down to 0.1 parts per million. Now, the problem with that is our final chloride action level is the long term was 500 parts per billion, which is 0.5 parts per million. So just above that level of detection, right? The butyl acrylate is after the emergency phase, we drop that down to 20 parts per billion. So we can't see that lowest level of that machine. All right, that's important. But you can smell butyl acrylate at much lower levels. So yes, there is a chance that chemical could be present and we don't see it with that machine. I mean, you need to understand that, right? Butyl acrylate, butyl acrylate's an irritant, right? It can cause some of the symptoms that people have presented. If that is what's causing it, I don't know. But again, we can see to a certain threshold with those machines.
But every time we go and say something about it, they spoke your pet, your house tested with this little machine, and it's like, and I know, doing my research, that machine doesn't mean anything anymore. It really doesn't, because if they go below that 0.1 level, your flooring, your walls, your paint, your plastic, everything goes off DOC.
That's right. That's right. So it only tells you if you have a serious problem, right? So what I would be concerned about
death.
in the homes,
that would almost be death at 0.1.
What I'd be concerned about with volatile organic monitoring is the vinyl chloride, because the vinyl chloride is a cancer-causing agent. You don't want that. You don't want the exposure to vinyl chloride, right? If you have a low-level butyl acrylate exposure,
I'm winning.
Everybody
come to my funeral in 5 years, thank you.
if you have a low-level butyl acrylate exposure, it's an irritant, right? It's not going to cause any long.
So I saw the question, who was speaking there? That is Mark Durno, a representative of the EPA, answering the question about the residential home test. I'm going to go over a couple things that he said in there. So in that, he admits that the PIDs, you maybe have heard me talk about this, it's called a photoionization detector. It's a handheld air tester. And this handheld air tester is what is being used in residential home tests that are being done for East Palestine residents. So he is saying that when testing for VOCs with this device, the lowest that the device can go down to is 0.1 parts per million. Translated to parts per billion, that's 100 parts per billion. So just for the sake of simplicity, it can go down to as low as 100 parts per billion with a B. Once this disaster going on was moved out of the emergency phase, the threshold that the EPA has set for butyl acrylate, the chemical in question, is 20 parts per billion. So the detector only starts reading this chemical at 100 parts per billion, but it reaches a level of concern at 20 parts per billion. So in other words, butyl acrylate needs to be at 5 times the recommended level of concern for the detector to even pick it up. So if the detector is picking up anything with it, it's way over what it should be at. This is the EPA literally saying that the device that they are using to test for butyl acrylate and other chemicals in these homes will not pick up butyl acrylate unless it is 5 times over the recommended exposure limit once it entered this phase of this, okay? So again, this sounds in the weeds, but these folks are having these tests done to tell them that it is safe to return home. When in reality, the EPA, CTEH, which is the railroad contractor, when they're using that device, they cannot say that it is safe for these folks to go home when they're doing these tests, okay? Butyl acrylate, according to the CDC, causes irritation of the eyes, skin, upper respiratory system, sensitization dermatitis, breathing difficulty, among other things. In these residents, a lot of folks are having symptoms that sound like that, but these folks are being told it is okay to go back when they're using this device. Again, this is the first time somebody from the EPA is really admitting that this is the case here. On top of this, I've also spoken with other experts, both on and off the record, talking about this sort of thing. And it looks like this might be the Substack article that just published as we're doing this. If you want all of the specifics on this, statuscoup.substack.com. And that is there, but and you can check that out. Sorry about that. That just happened as we were going. I spent some time this afternoon writing this, and Jordan essentially went through, made sure everything was good to go, made my writing a little bit more clear because that can be a little bit jumbled, and got it out there. But again, this is the first time that the EPA is actually admitting that this device is not usable, is not feasible for testing butyl acrylate at the levels of where it could be a concern. Again, the device will only test at 100, or will only start to register at 100 parts per billion, but 20 parts per billion is the level of concern. Add on top of this, I've spoken with other experts, both on the record and off the record. These folks are not just any random Joe Schmo. These are folks who have, some of them multiple chemistry degrees, including a PhD, toxicology degrees, all sorts of industrial gas experts, including Aaron Bragg, who we've talked to on the show before. Many of these folks are telling me also that these PIDs, photoionization devices that are being used, cannot test for many of the byproducts of vinyl chloride when it is set on fire. So vinyl chloride is in these cars. These cars are set on fire, and several of the other byproducts include formaldehyde, phosgene, and hydrogen chloride. I can speak specifically about phosgene and formaldehyde here. Phosgene, Aaron Bragg tells me straight off the bat, is not going to test anything for phosgene. You're not going to find phosgene with a PID. My other source, who is anonymous, we can't share his name only because of his employer. He has also said the same thing. And then formaldehyde, another potential byproduct here, can only be tested with a PID if there is a special attachment onto the PID. But the issue is when you have this attachment on your PID device, you cannot test for anything else. So it's either just test for formaldehyde or test for the other chemicals in question. You can't do both at the same time. So that tells me, because I haven't seen a formaldehyde response on any residential home test, that is a chemical that has not been tested for as well, in addition to, the potential concerns with butyl acrylate. One last element that I want to point to on this, and again, I apologize, this is very in the weeds here, but this is important. A lot of these chemicals, if you smell it, it's already a concern. Butyl acrylate, that's not necessarily the case, but with formaldehyde and with phosgene, if you can smell them, you're already at a level of concern. So there's a lot of unanswered questions still here, but we just had one big one answered today, and that is the EPA, once again, admitting for the first time that with those PID detectors that are being used in residential home tests, it is not going to pick up butyl acrylate until it is 5 times the level of concern at that stage of this event. So that is a big takeaway here from the residential air tests. And I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything here. Yes. Okay. I want to move on now to the vent and burn decisions. Now, there are a lot of important pieces to this part of the vent and burn. So I'm going to go through a couple different things here. As we talked about briefly with Jamie there, initially this was meant to be one car, that was one train car that they had deemed needed to be vented and burned, needed to have a controlled burn is another way to put it, another way that you've all likely heard it described. So the vent and burn decision, initially meant to be one car, eventually gets bumped to 5. We learned from Jamie that at the time, no residents had any clue about whether it be one car or 5 cars being burned. Nothing was brought to their attention at that point as residents of the town. We heard this week a whole bunch of people casting blame, a whole bunch of people mostly being Norfolk Southern CEO Alan Shaw, trying to place blame on the fire chief for this line of questioning. Colin, we can go ahead and I don't know if you have this one, actually. We can go ahead and play this one. I don't have a number on it. It's in the vent and burn section. If not, it's not a big deal. 330 to 418.
Then the decision was made to do a vent and burn.
And once again, who was that decision made by?
By Unified Command, sir.
Who specifically in Unified Command said this is what we're going to do? You're blaming it on a chief in East Palestine at this point. Is that correct?
Senator, the Unified Command was under the leadership of the incident commander, who was in close coordination with Governor DeWine.
So your cars are on fire, it's your rail, it's your incident, and you're going to leave it to a local fire chief who's probably never had to deal with potentially such a catastrophe before. And he's going to make the decision.
Senator, the Unified Command, was taking input from a number of different constituencies.
So again, blame trying to be placed on the fire chief in that clip. Doug Mastriano and Katie Muth in the Pennsylvania Senate, where that clip was from. I covered that. There's a video about that you can go watch if you want to see the whole hearing. There's a lot of good questions are asked there. But blame trying to be placed on the fire chief. The fire chief was the incident commander at this stage of the game, but what we learned in last night's town hall, according to the mayor, there were roughly 40 people in the room while these decisions were being made. The EPA notably says at that point, they would not be in the position to make the decision on any of this at this phase, but they're there to provide guidance. We're going to play another clip here. Just so that you all know who's talking, there's going to be a lot of talk from a gentleman who is on the left side of the table. That is a representative from the EPA, Mark Durno. In the gentleman to the right is the mayor, Trent Conaway. And then you'll also notice Jamie on the right, as well as two other residents on the left. So the main people talking in this are going to be on the right, Mayor Trent Conaway of East Palestine, and on the left, EPA Representative Mark Durno. And Colin, you can go ahead and play clip 13.
Why did the EPA allow the burning of 4 additional cars when there was only an issue with 1?
Yeah, so we did not authorize that. We are not, that when we're in that phase of the emergency, we don't make that decision. We provide input to those decisions. And what we provided was an adequate, we helped develop the modeling for what the air was going to do when the plan was just to burn 1 car, right? Because that was the original plan. That night, Sunday night, the plan was vent and burn 1 car. On Monday, we learned that they made the decision to vent and burn 5 cars. We weren't part of that decision.
But you guys knew before?
Before the vent and burn happened, we knew it was happening, so we enhanced our air monitoring equipment to be able to handle something more.
Was there nobody who could say, nope, you're not going to burn 4 additional cars?
So,
when that wasn't in the plan?
It was our understanding that there was a significant risk of explosion, and that was the rationale behind it. I've been on vent and burns in the past, not 5 cars, but I have seen it done. I saw it done on a propane tank car before. That was pretty massive, and if that thing would have blown up, it would have taken lives.
Okay, but aren't the tankers for this designed to actually just split open rather than shrapnel?
So that's above my pay grade. I don't know the answer.
That's
So I was in the room, so I'll tell you what, from my perspective, what happened. The relief valves were gummed up. It was doing a process called polymerization, and I know that's probably not how you pronounce that word. It was going from a liquid to a solid. It was like a slime. They put an additive in there to keep it stable as they transfer it across.
Right.
When it wrecked, those cars were in the center of the heat, so that's where they got all the heat. So therefore, it burnt the additive out, is what we were told. And this is what we were told. We're not experts. We're not chemists. I'm the mayor. He's the fire chief. And there was a bunch of other people in the room. The people who actually owned the stuff were in the room. As there's rumors that they weren't. They were. They were consulted. They were in there.
They were there.
They were there.
That's something that they didn't.
We didn't know that.
Yeah, I don't know why they don't put it out, but it's town hall. We might as well get the truth out.
Yeah,
No, I don't know their names. I'm sorry, I don't know.
That came up at the Senate hearings. That's
Right,
why it's such a shock.
Yeah, they were there.
They
I
blamed
don't
it all
know
on the fire chief.
what.
They blamed it all on the fire chief.
So the fire chief was the incident commander, but no, he did not make that decision by himself. There was 40 people in that room. So yes, he was the incident commander. So that's who they want to blame. I got his back, and I'll stand behind that man for anything. After what we've been through,
We know that. There's no way.
I got his back, he's got mine, and I'm going to chuck him under the bus. I'll be right under that tire with him because, yeah. So they were there. The people that owned it was either the car or the liquid. I don't want to be misquoted. They were there. It was 2 guys. I don't know who they were. So they knew the situation. The temperature was rising. I saw it with my own eyes with the drone footage, and going in, he was measuring I couldn't see the actual temperature. I saw the guy in there measuring it, and that man came up and said he was who got us through this. That the temperature's rising. I think it's too. I'm just throwing these out. I don't know if these are the exact temperatures, but it was 135, and it should have been just normal temperature. If it got to 155, they couldn't put anybody in there. And once it got to 155, it was crazy and it was going to blow up. We had the Ohio National Guard, who were tremendous during this whole thing. They gave us a map and said, this is what a model. This is what's going to happen if this thing blows up. And it was a 3/4 mile area. Now, I'm not going to say it would have been flat, but there would have been many houses or, maybe some of the commercial buildings would have been there. Saran fab wouldn't have been there. I mean, there's some buildings that wouldn't be there. They would have just been
That's what they
destroyed.
made you believe, but as I said, the experts that I listened to said that these are designed to just blow open, not send shrapnel. Blow open, blow out the contact.
Well, everything was clogged up because they were going to, when we got there.
Not from a valve.
What?
The tanker is designed.
I can't speak on. I don't know. I'm just saying all the safety valves, they were spouting off. I was down there at Lakes. I was down there.
Didn't the NTSB say that the valves were in working condition? Does anyone
I
recall?
thought it was
that?
just the one that was the aluminum with melted.
Yeah, that's.
I thought it was just one.
But the valves are like clogged. They were clogged up from the inside, is what we were being told.
What you were being told.
So.
Couldn't they just have
But I
put
think
water
that's,
on it to keep the temperature down?
But I think
We can't risk putting people in there. Plus, it's an insulated tank.
You can't do anything about it.
So there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to be very specific on a couple things. So my apologies if I'm not looking directly at you. I want to make sure I get a couple of these quotes exactly right. So the very first part of this is really important. So the EPA gentleman, Durno, says, and I'm going to quote it exactly, "We helped develop the modeling for what the air was going to do when the plan was to burn just one car, because that was the original plan. That night, Sunday night, that was the plan. On Monday, we learned that they had made the decision to vent and burn 5 cars. We were not part of that decision." Big question here is, who is the they that Durno is talking about here? Durno from the EPA. Again, it's on Monday, we learned they made the decision to vent and burn 5 cars. We were not part of that decision. Who the they is here is very important. I have not heard specifically from anybody who this they is. We'll have to try to follow up and see with if we can get a conversation with the mayor. I'm not going to hold my breath on that. I have tried to reach out to the mayor's office already in the past. I have never gotten through here. So that is definitely something that we are trying to sort out here, is who is the they in question as far as the person or the people making the decision to change from burning and venting 1 car in this controlled burn to the decision to do 5. At that point, again, the modeling that had been done, according to Mr. Durno here of the EPA, the modeling that was done by the EPA was for the venting and burning of 1 car. That's on Sunday night. That is submitted. Monday morning, they show up, and it's like, well, now it's 5 cars that are going to be vented and burned. It sounds like there is, at that point, no modeling for what will happen when you do a vent and burn with 5 cars, which should be a major red flag that should have been being waved here. It sounds like that in that conversation, the 1 mile radius that is talked about so often here was for the explosion, for the shrapnel, which we've heard many times over, but that is now exactly what the mayor is confirming here, that is because of I believe he said the Ohio National Guard provided him with a map. It might not have been the National Guard. It could have been the Ohio EPA with the mile radius as potential for explosion and shrapnel coming from a car that would have exploded. So that's another major element of this that has been confirmed. We also know, too, the mayor stepping in and saying, when he chimed in and said, "I was in the room. Here's what I understand from this." So he says, "I was in the room," and he says that the valves were gummed up. The valves that he are talking about are the valves that he's talking about are the on the back sides or on the ends of these tanker cars. They are meant to relieve pressure. It's a pressure relief valve. So when these things get into an incident where there's a problem, they are meant to release pressure through the pressure valves on the end of the train, and that's how they're designed. I talked a little bit with Aaron Bragg about this, who again has done a lot of this sort of work before. So that is a major element of this that he talks about, and a major element of them being gummed up would be a major concern. Why are they getting gummed up if this is just happening at this point. That's a major red flag that needs to be looked further into. I am planning on talking with Aaron Bragg again later this week on Friday. He was not available today or tomorrow, but I'm going to ask him very specifically about that whole portion of this, because from my understanding when I spoke with him, and we have this clip here, I believe, he's saying that if the pressure release valves were working properly, and we heard we heard the mayor there saying that the valves were spurting off, like sounding like stuff was coming out of them potentially, then that should actually be causing the cars to cool down. I'm not an expert in this. We will confirm later further with Aaron. But Colin, we can go ahead and play clip 14.
With that being said, when you have a refrigerated liquid, which this is vinyl chloride, when you typically relieve the pressure on a refrigerated liquid, it gets colder. It does not get warmer. So I had questions because I didn't know, okay, I just don't know this product. I don't know how it behaves, but it's not adding up to me. If the pressure is relieving, this thing should be getting colder, not hotter.
So again, another major thing here that we're hearing. The mayor was in the room. He does his best to kind of explain what's going on to the best of his ability here. But I want to remind folks once again, this was, now the mayor knows a lot more about this conversation, about what happened. I know a lot more about what happened. Residents of East Palestine know a lot more about what happened. But this, we're talking like night of, to be able to know what to look for and know the right questions to ask as a small town mayor is tough to do. Do I think that there are things that the mayor could be doing better or have done better? Sure. But at the time, in the moment, when he's giving his description of what's happening and not knowing exactly the correct terminology or not knowing what to look for, that's absolutely understandable. And the fact that he and his local fire chief were needing to be essentially decision makers during a lot of this is also just a massive failure of communication or a failure of something, because folks who are much more well-versed in all of this sort of stuff should be the ones ultimately making a lot of these decisions. It sounds like there were advice coming from all sorts of different places. We also heard the mayor say, this is the first time I've heard this, that the people who owned either the chemicals in question or who owned the actual rail car were present in the room with the 40 or so people in incident command. So another kind of big piece of info here. I've got one last section to go through here. And then right after that, we're going to have Zeynab coming on. She's going to be discussing what's going on with all of this anti-trans legislation coming up, going around the country, essentially, in a lot of these state houses. A lot of this has been brought up in regards to the shooting that happened in Nashville, the tragic shooting that happened in Nashville, where several children and adults were killed inside of a school. So there's been a lot of talk about trans folks as a result of that, but no talk about gun legislation, unfortunately, in a lot of cases there, regardless of what you think about the topic. Zeynab, I'm sure, is going to have an interesting take and have a lot of good information on that. So please stay tuned for that. The last element that I want to discuss here, though, is the ongoing contaminated soil cleanup. So that's another big piece here of the puzzle that Jamie talked about a little bit. For those of you who don't know, Norfolk Southern initially buried all of these contaminants underneath the railroad tracks during their initial cleanup, right? In my opinion, they did that to get the railroad open as quick as possible. That's speculation at this point, but that seems to be the case that happened. So they bury the contaminants under the track to get the tracks built up and ready to go again. A question at this hearing came in from a resident regarding why the decision was made to dig up just one set of tracks at a time rather than two. That was actually Jamie who asked that question. Colin, we go ahead and play clip 10, part 1.
Needs addressed is, why are we getting sick? Why are our children getting sick? And at least from what I've been seeing, I have a lot of people reach out to me, because I am an organizer. Kids that weren't sick before are now getting sick since they're carrying up these tracks. I guess my personal question is, who made the decision that it was okay to tear up one side of the tracks at a time? Again, I'm not a scientist, but it seems like that's exposing us even longer.
Yeah.
And the EPA said that gases would come out of that. So if you have a train flying by on the other track, again, I'm not a scientist, but it's kind of like blowing it with a fan.
Yeah.
So I guess, that's my question is, who made that decision, if you know,
Well,
and why?
we did approve that plan, so, that's on us. We did approve that plan. The idea was, it's twofold, right? Keep the tracks moving, of course, that's the railroad's interest. But on the excavation side, I wouldn't want to have that entire area opened up at the same time. And that's just larger surface area for gases to come to the surface and flow downwind. To me, I honestly, just thinking back on this, I would like to see that happen in smaller sections. We have a half-mile trench open right now, right? Now we're monitoring. Everything's pretty much cleaned up. On the east end, we're still seeing contamination coming from the sidewalls. So we know that eventually we're going to have to dig. They're going to have to dig more to the south to chase the waste. And underneath where those waste piles are staged right now, we know there's contamination there. But that's a large trench that's open and exposed right now. On the north side, we may make the recommendation to do it a piece at a time. Dig some, verify clean, then backfill, so it's not that much exposure, so less vaporous in the air.
So initially, halfway reasonable answer, not the best. I mean, I'll say at the outset, the first part that he says is number one, to get the tracks open again. That is not reasonable. That shouldn't be playing into the factor at all. The health and well-being of the residents, especially the residents who live close to the tracks, should be the number one priority in that case. The second part of his answer is the part that I can understand making some sense. He says right now, and I will say though that this right now, there's currently a half a mile trench dug up in town with all sorts of surface area for potential gases to be seeping up from the contaminated soil. So that is a major issue. He's saying that if you were to do both sides at the same time, that would be even more surface area. The question, the way that Jamie frames it is, wouldn't it be faster and it would only be all exposed for a shorter period of time rather than doing it one at a time? Because right now what they're doing, they've spent a couple weeks already. It's going to be a couple weeks more to do just one set of the tracks. On the south side of the tracks, I believe, if I'm oriented correctly. So they're doing the south tracks right now, and then they're going to eventually, when those are complete, tear up the whole north side of the tracks and have that side exposed. So that was the EPA's initial recommendation that them and Norfolk Southern came to an agreement on. Mr. Durno here from the EPA saying, for the other side, he might make a recommendation to do smaller amounts at a time. But the debate is kind of up in the air still as to whether doing one side at a time is necessarily better than doing it all at once and having it be a shorter duration of time. It's either more surface area of exposed soil for a shorter period of time, or a longer period of time with less exposed. It's kind of 6 one way, half a dozen the other. The part of this that shocked me is what we're about to listen to in part 2 here of clip 10, Colin, where there were other motives being kind of questioned here when they were making this decision. Go ahead and play clip 10, part 2.
So if EPA tomorrow said tear up both sets of tracks, you guys have the power to tell them, no, tear them both up now.
We have the ability to order them to do that, yes. If we ordered them to tear up both sets of tracks at the same time, I'm sure we could see it.
They actually did it the smart way. This is my personal opinion. One at a time, because if they would have done both, it would turn into a lawsuit, and for 6 months to a year, we would have just been sitting in limbo because it would have been going back and forth. They have as many attorneys as we do people working in the village. So,
well, you already have a lawsuit. The EPA does have a lawsuit. Right?
We issued, yes, the administrative order is a legal document. Yes.
It's legality over lives.
So if you didn't catch that in the beginning there, the EPA does have the authority to tell Norfolk Southern to dig up both sets of tracks at once, but they did not, because they were worried about getting sued. So potentially getting, and this would be the EPA being sued by Norfolk Southern here. Okay. So even if, again, it's kind of up in the air as to whether digging up both sides of tracks at the same time, getting the whole cleanup done in a shorter period of time, rather than one at a time, is kind of the better option. they probably at this point potentially didn't even look into that, because they're like, well, if we do that, the corporation that caused all of these problems in the first place is probably going to sue us. That should not be entering the decision-making process as to how this cleanup should go. The only things that should be in the decision-making process for this cleanup are, how do we get this cleaned up as quickly as possible? And how do we make sure that residents are not exposed to these harmful chemicals that are there by no fault of their own, but fully by the fault of Norfolk Southern, the company who caused all of these issues in the first place? That blew my mind when I heard that, we're not even really exploring that option because we knew we would get sued right away. And the unfortunate reality here is when the mayor chimes in and says, unfortunately, I think that was the right decision, because otherwise we would just be in lawsuits and none of it would be being dug up right now. And the unfortunate reality is that I think that is probably true, that if the EPA asked them to dig up both sides at once, therefore closing the railroad temporarily through this area, Norfolk Southern very well would have sued the EPA, held the whole thing up much longer, and these residents would be stuck there for however long trying to deal with all of this. And that is how it is set up in our country, that the corporation who caused all of these problems to begin with can sue the government agency whose job it is to try to advise or help through the cleanup process for telling them to clean up the mess that they caused. I don't know what else to say about that. It's the unfortunate reality of the situation here. So again, I mean, all sorts of bombshell new information here. There's still a lot even to go through that we're gonna save, and we're also gonna actively try to follow up and see if we can figure out some of these sorts of things. Again, the big one from kind of the second part of this that I pushed on in regards to the vent and burn was, the EPA only suggesting, the EPA providing modeling for a 1-car vent and burn on Sunday night. And then on Monday, they show up and it looks like it's 5. It sure seems like there's no modeling for a 5-car vent and burn. And what decisions would be made differently if that were to be the case? Again, the direct quote from Mark Durno: on Monday, we learned they made the decision to vent and burn 5 cars. We weren't part of that decision. Who was they? Now, my instincts tell me that they're going to say they was the incident commander. Another person try to lay some more blame on the fire chief, but who is telling the fire chief to do that? That's the big question and takeaway for me right now. I'm going to bring Zeynab in here for a second, and we'll start to introduce some of what she's going on here too. Zeynab, I'm sorry that I went much longer than I said I was going to there, but that was a lot of information to unpack.
That reminds me, have you guys shown the Substack article yet? Because this is a lot of information and it's a lot to absorb. And one of the great things that I saw that you posted today and that you worked on, and I was just kind of looking it over a few minutes ago, was a Substack piece. And for some folks, reading through it and being able to look and then refer back helps to really take all of that in. Absolutely. So I would really appreciate the written piece. I know that Colin has it here kind of in the background if we wanted to pull it up and show it on the side, but I know you worked really hard on that, and that's a great article. Wanted to make sure that we mentioned it before you ducked out.
No, I absolutely agreed. And when I first started, it wasn't ready yet. So thank you, Jordan, for going through and getting that finalized and out there for us. I know all of us, I know Zeynab has been, I know Jordan has been, I know I have been trying to write more I think it's a great way to kind of be a nice companion to a lot of the videos and a lot of the live streams. So we are all writing a lot more. It's been fun for me to kind of go through and learn some of the process. I haven't done tons of news writing before, so I've been grateful for the advice so far in doing this. So please definitely go check that out. It's another free subscription that you can have from Status Coup. There is also a paid version, if I'm not correct, that folks can check out as well if they are interested. I wanted to before I forget here, and then I'm very interested to hear what you're working on with all of the trans legislation going on across the United States right now. That is very, frankly, ridiculous in a lot of cases going on. I wanted to answer one question from the super chats here that was brought up regarding the Eric Coppolino interview. Is there any confirmation that there might have been undisclosed substances in the train cars? That is something I'm still looking into. Jordan's still looking into. We very clearly at the end of that interview said there was a lot of stuff that we were uncertain about at that point and that we needed to independently confirm. We're still working on independently confirming some of the stuff in that interview. If we find anything new, we absolutely will bring it to you to let you know what's going on there.
Yeah, and thanks, Das Fleisch.
Yes, yes, and thank you for the super.
They are always asking great questions.
Yes, yes, no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, well, curious to hear what you got for us today, Zeynab.
Well, it's a little mix of a lot going on, right? One of the things that we had was many of you guys know there was a school shooting in Nashville, Tennessee at a middle school there. It was a Christian academy. The shooter killed 3 children and 3 adults. It was apparently targeted. There's a manifesto to be released, and we've seen this violence over and over and over again. And today we're going to be talking about some of that, but we're also going to be talking about the fact that the media has really, especially more leaning toward the right, places like Fox News, and of course you've got the Daily Wire, leaning on the fact that this person, this shooter was identified as transgender, female to male, biologically female, transition to male, and just blowing up all kinds of hysteria around this in the most ironic fashion, because hate crimes have been on the rise across this country. And I do agree, and we're going to get into that a little bit, because a U.S. senator, the one senator to vote against the hate crime bill, now wants this prosecuted as a hate crime against Christians, but wants to also prioritize hate crimes against Christians. Hate crimes against any religion, any group is wrong. And I would agree that if somebody went into a school and shot, and one of their motivations was rooted in religion, rooted in race, rooted in a protected class along those lines, then yes, I would identify that as a hate crime. But it is so ironic to me that the one senator who voted against the hate crime bill is now turning it on its head. And I see this a lot from people that lean more right. They will take things and kind of twist it, and they will make things into a cultural war. And right now we're going to talk about the litany of state legislation that's getting passed. Anti-trans legislation, legislation against drag shows, statewide legislation against medical treatment, medical care for the trans community. And what's interesting is, and we're not covering this in this segment, but most of these states that this is happening in, the majority of their seats at the state house level and local go uncontested.
Right.
Polls in these states are showing that there's a misconception among the mainstream media that's kind of put forward, and that I often see online and from others, that, you know, these states are full of bigots. They're just a whole bunch of bigoted people that want to see this legislation passed, and that the state houses are acting at the behest of who they represent. Well, do our representatives really work on the behest of us? I mean, we've just looked at East Palestine for what, an hour and 15 minutes, showing how our representatives don't represent us time and time and time again. The same is true for this state, for these states. In Kentucky, the anti-trans legislation was highly unpopular. Polling even showed 60% of conservatives in Kentucky, which is my home state, are against it. Kentucky has per capita the highest amount of LGBTQ identifying individuals in the country. So to pass a bill in the state of Kentucky, and then a lot of, I'm hearing bigotry from the left, insinuating that all the people in these states are this way, and that the voters are this way, and that it's their fault. But it's not. It's because the Democratic Party has abandoned these states. These seats are uncontested. these extremists swooped in and took the seats. Voters didn't really have a choice because no one else was running. And now we have extremist-led theocratic legislation being passed that only a very, very small fraction of the country even supports, building on this hysteria, also to direct us away from other issues like our economic crises that we're under right now.
No, absolutely.
A huge mouthful, and we'll be digging into all of that in just a few minutes.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've even seen a little bit of it here. I not all of my attention has been focused on it, but I know in the state of Texas, currently they're getting ready to vote on a bill definitely pertaining to drag shows and things like this. And I saw there was it was thousands of people who had signed up to speak at a hearing in the Texas. I forget if it was in the Senate or the House of Representatives in Texas here in Austin. But it was thousands of folks going against this legislation that would harm the ability. It would make drag shows it would make them essentially criminal in a lot of cases, depending on the instance that you're looking at. And there were only a handful, maybe I forget the specific number, but we're talking 20 or 30 folks coming out to speak in support of it. So you've got a couple thousand on one side versus a couple dozens on the other. But ultimately we'll see what ends up happening with these. But folks need to speak out about this sort of thing if you want to prevent this from happening in your state. Unfortunately, like you're saying, a lot of these seats and these people who are making these decisions run in uncontested races. That means no one is primarying them in many cases, and in some cases nobody's running against them on the other side, because unfortunately
Texas
in a lot
has
of these,
more than 40% uncontested.
Wow.
Seats.
40%. Yeah. And a big part of that, I'll say, is and then I'll let you go and get started here. A big part of that, I think, is that so many of the districts in Texas, whether we're talking state districts or federal districts for House of Representatives and things like this, are so gerrymandered. It's insane. I live in Texas 35, which is the most oddly shaped district ever. It basically includes the east side of Austin and then follows a narrow, less than 1 mile strip of land following I-35 down to San Antonio, and then includes a portion of San Antonio. So
I ran a candidate there that only lost by 0.5% in 2018. So we do hear, and I understand where you're getting this from, that they're gerrymandered, but that is kind of the excuse that the Democrats are giving us and that mainstream media are giving us. When I called and talked to the voters, and I've talked to tens of thousands of voters from Texas to Kentucky to Washington State to New York to all over the country, almost everyone supports the same thing. Almost everyone identifies as independent. They're tired of both parties. We all agree on most things at the end of the day, even the cultural issues we agree on for the most part. And what I found is in these states where there is gerrymandering and it does impact, but also it's been used as an excuse for the Democrats to abandon those areas, because I've ran people in there that were just points away from winning, that had only raised maybe $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 compared to the incumbent that had raised 5, 6, 7 million. So if you're only a half a point away and you've raised, like a Rick Trevino in Texas, for instance, he raised 63,000, the largest district, close to San Antonio, but the largest district in Texas. And he almost beat Gina Ortiz Jones. They had to go into a runoff. He raised $62,000. She raised 4.9 million.
Yeah, no, it's tough. And even before you get to the stage of having the general election, the unfortunate reality, and I take your point fully on that doesn't mean folks should give up on those races if it's a heavy lean R or lean D district. But in a lot of cases, these folks don't even have a primary challenger. So, even if you are, let's say you're, in Texas, a lot of Republican leaning districts, if you're a Republican who thinks that the government has no business legislating drag queens because they should have the freedom to do what they want and express themselves the way that they want to, why is there not a Republican challenger who is saying, hey, I'm more conservative in some of these ideals, but like, I'm also, maybe they're a little bit libertarian in the sense that, like, they want to let people do what they want to do, because that's a big part of the United States.
it's hard to
frustrating
run.
see.
It costs money. It takes time.
Mm-hmm.
The pay for state house reps really in a lot of places isn't that much.
Right.
So you end up having like it break across class lines where rich people run and then people are kind of priced out and the parties will keep you off the ballot. They'll just knock you right off the ballot. I dealt with that. Right. But I think that there is hope. There's hope for independent candidates. There's hope for, primary challengers. And I think where our focus needs to be is where the right wing has been making this huge shift, this crazy culture war where they're banning books and, abortion's a great example. Only 12% of the country, and this is across the country, and this is verified in state after state, even Texas, it's highly unpopular. Anti-abortion laws are highly unpopular. Most folks support some kind of regulation, but out of the 12% that supports a ban, only a very tiny fraction of that supports a full ban. Right. It's one of the most unpopular policies in this country, but the media is always telling us that it's the most divisive, that it's split, that the country is split on it. That's just not factual. It's just that people are getting elected into these state houses that have an agenda to pass theocratic legislation, and they're running and they have the money and backing to do it.
Absolutely. Well, Zeynab, looking forward to seeing what you've got here. I'll let you get on with it.
Thank you for your amazing coverage on there was so much going on in the two hearings today, and Norfolk Southern not showing up, and then everything that's going on uncovering testing, especially with dioxins. That's really good work because I'm not seeing this information anywhere else, and it's needed. So join
yes
StatusCoup.com/join and help support Lewis's work. So we want to get him back on the ground. Lewis is doing the investigative work right now, even though he's not in East Palestine. He's on the phone, just like he said, talking to people, bringing you guys the updates. So thank you so much, Lewis.
Thank you. And I'll say, as I leave right now, we did get one new member during the first section here. Welcome to Status Coup member Alice. So Alice, thank you for joining. StatusCoup.com/join. All right, Zeynab, thank you.
Thanks. Bye, Lewis. All righty. So I guess we can get into what's been going on nationally. So as I had mentioned, there was a school shooting at Covenant School is the name of the school in Nashville, Tennessee. 3 children died. 3 adults died. One of the main things that we're hearing over and over and over again from the media is that this person identified as transgender. That's true. It was this individual was a person who initially identified as female or was female at birth and then transitioned to male. But there's so many other layers to this story. There's so much other issues going on with this. And the fact is there have been already several hundred mass shootings in the United States just in the first quarter of this year, and only one person identified as transgender. So what we're going to do right now is with this, it's a political talking point. So it's not really focusing on the problems, which often happens, I would say, with both parties, with people from all across the political spectrum, where as soon as something like this happens, a tragedy, particularly a mass shooting, it's thoughts and prayers, and then it's politicized. And then who always gets overlooked are the families that are impacted by the violence and discussions of what can help to prevent the violence. But it's almost a lack of empathy that we see from each other on when violence happens like this. And mass shootings have become extraordinarily common in our country. So I am going to play a clip here from Tucker Carlson. I actually have 2 clips. And these clips, it is just the height of irony coming from Tucker here about let's see, I actually needed 2. There we go. I want to make sure that I have the other one uploaded. Okay. It is actually the height of irony because a lot of these shootings, many of the shootings, and I'll show a little bit later, many of the shootings are tied, mass shootings that we have in this country are actually tied to domestic violence. That's the number one cause of mass shootings in this country. Secondly, when we have seen other extremists that have come forward that, you know, has been discovered that they're either anti-Semitic or they have bought into some of the more right-wing culture war rhetoric that's fawning at violence. People like Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, and others will refuse to discuss that point and instead will say it's all about mental health. It's not about, you know, being radicalized. It's not radicalization. It's not our rhetoric. It's not what's happening. And here, Tucker Carlson is going to say the exact opposite.
Neo-Nazi group active in New England. The least right-wing region in America. Every state is blue. But there's a neo-Nazi group that's terrifying everybody. Look, just to be clear, we're not against people, American citizens, carrying firearms, having firearms. We support it, including trans people. It's fine. But what you're watching here is not the exercise of the Second Amendment. What you're watching here is political hysteria, fear, ginned up on purpose with maximum dishonesty in order to get people in a state of agitation, armed people in a state of agitation. Doesn't matter if they're trans or not, whatever that is. It's the same template always. Scare the crap out of your voters, tell them that their lives are at risk, encourage them to get guns. How do you think that ends? But by the way, if we're following the logic here, and why not? That's in short supply in this country. You have to kind of wonder, like, what's the limit to this? So if trans people are in fear for their lives in every region in the country, including New England, which apparently is crawling with Nazis now, why wouldn't we be arming them as we are, say, Ukraine's trans army? And there are famously trans people in Ukraine's army. They're very, very proud of that. So why stop with AR-15s? I mean, why not F-35s or tanks? You know.
And I will say that this was in response to an NPR article. And Tucker Carlson was discussing this on his show before the mass shooting, 2 days before the mass shooting in Nashville. So when he laughs at the fact that, yes, there are neo-Nazis in New England, hate to tell you, but in many of these areas that are considered quote unquote blue states, liberal states, this is where a lot of these groups are, where they're rooted, where they're growing, where the money is being fed into. There's a lot less in the poor South. There's a lot less in Kentucky. There's a lot less in Tennessee. There's a lot less in Georgia. A lot of these new sort of right-wing, more extremist aren't just your regular old, redneck conservatives. And I say that lovingly because I'm a redneck. It's not us. It's not us that are, farming in our backyards and, going bow hunting during deer season. It's folks that have money. It's upper middle class, suburbanite, mostly white folks in suburban areas. Some of the places that this is growing the most is Oregon, Washington, California, and yes, New England. So there is this trope. There's this trope that, and even conservatives like Tucker Carlson, or I don't even consider him a conservative. I consider him, fringe, but even someone like a Tucker Carlson will paint this caricature of individuals like that as poor Appalachians, poor people out of Tennessee, poor people out of rural America. And that's just not factual. So I'm going to play, or they'll equate it to all Trump voters. That's not factual either. Let me play one more clip. And this one is really scary because this one, Tucker Carlson says specifically Ironically, he talked about fomenting hate, right? Fomenting fear, how people foment fear to get their voters to go out and vote. They tell them to buy weapons. They tell them. Tucker Carlson 3 weeks ago was fomenting about a civil war, was making calls to bring back 1776. He was telling people to go buy arms because we're going to be facing a civil war. So who has been fomenting fear? Where did the fear start? Where is the fear rooted in? Who is taking rights away from who? Right now, there are hundreds of pieces of legislation. I'll pull that up really quick. I have a map here for you guys from the ACLU. There are 435 anti-LGBTQ bills in the U.S. Most of those are being passed at the state level. Some of them have to do with book bannings. Some of them have to do with banning healthcare. Others of them is banning drag shows, which kind of blows my mind, because why the hell do you care if someone has like an adult drag show that people can go to? And you know, and that's been a part of our culture for a very long time. Other ones have ID laws where somebody can't change their gender on their ID. Others have laws where, for instance, in Indiana, where I live, a law just passed where if my child goes to school tomorrow and they say, I want to identify as he, him, then the state has to report that not only to me, but to Child Protective Services, CPS. If my kid goes to school tomorrow in Indiana and says that they want to go by a different pronoun, it has to be reported to CPS. That's insane. In Florida, there is a law that passed that actually gives immunity to parents who cross the border, come to Florida, bring kids with them, as long as they claim that the kids are being manipulated into transgender ideology. They're sanctioning kidnapping. These laws are written so broadly and so stupid, I don't know how they're not going to be challenged. But it's insane to me. So let's say I was a domestic violence survivor advocate for 20 years, about 16 years. Let's say that somebody's ex takes their kids and then they, run their kids across state lines, which happens a lot in domestic violence situations. They get to Florida, they can tell the Florida law enforcement, my wife was trying to manipulate our kids into, being transgendered. What's even worse is if there is a transgendered child who identifies as transgender, they can be removed from their parents. There's no clear legal system to protect parents against this. There's no clear avenue for protection of the child. It's a disaster. And it is an infringement and hatred toward the trans community. But it's also deeply, deeply broad language. Some of these bills are banning testosterone treatment. So what about folks within the trans community, outside the trans community that need testosterone treatment? What about estrogen treatment for women that have things like polycystic ovarian syndrome or other issues? There's a lot of issues where folks have to take estrogen in order to prevent cancers, in order to prevent cysts, and as a form of birth control. Some of these laws in the states that are on the books or ready to be passed will ban birth control. They're so broad, and they're so stupid, and they're full of hate, and they're illogical. But yet, we're being lied to and saying the focus is on the children. It's taking care of children. But if you read the legislation, it's so broad and it's so abusive that it really is an infringement on rights. So let's move on to playing the last clip. Let's see.
And the pistol. We now have horrifying body cam footage from within the school. So unsettling, we're not going to show it to you. But somehow we can't see the manifesto in which the killer explains why she killed. Why is that? It's not accidental. Well, you know exactly why it is. Because it would make the obvious undeniable. The trans movement is targeting Christians, including with violence. Most Christian leaders in this country don't want to admit that. Admitting it might force them to take deeply unfashionable positions. But it is true, and anyone who's paying attention knows that it's true. And so, like most true things at this point, it is officially suppressed.
So there we have Tucker Carlson saying explicitly that the trans community is a danger to Christians. Based on what? Based on a horrific, violent act by one person? Who's taking whose rights away? Who's trying to infringe on another community? Who is out there saber rattling about conformism and individuals fitting their ideal mold of whatever it is? It's folks like Tucker Carlson. It's not your everyday Christian, but it's folks like Tucker Carlson. It's this small, fringe, loud, very loud minority in the country that is actually trying to push their will on others. And that community is fomenting hate toward the LGBTQ community. And that same community is the ones who want to take away any kind of abortion rights. It's the same community that is running around doing the, red pill trad wife nonsense that we have going on right now, trying to push, women back into a framework of, submission. And we all see it. It's all out there. And it's making average everyday people in these red states look like it's on them, but it's not. It's a small fringe within those states. So there's an opportunity for those states to buck what's going on, for the people to show up, for them to run for office, for them to protest, for something to get done here. So a little bit of background here. I'm going to show you one tweet from... I know some people don't like Hassan Piker. Some people do. I usually don't follow him, but I thought that this was a informative tweet. Over the past 5 years, 2,840 plus mass shootings have occurred in the U.S. 3 of those shooters have been trans. Guns are the #1 killer of children, 1 to 18, and the right are salivating over a school shooter being trans to deflect away from the main issue, ease of access to weapons. And I have to agree with Hassan there. That's an insane amount. Look at that number again. 2,840 mass shootings in the United States in 5 years. So the problem is a lot more substantial. And so far, we haven't seen any kind of, background checks. This person who, and I don't like saying the perpetrators' names, but the person who was the shooter at a Covenant school in Knoxville, they had reported suicidal thoughts. They had told their friends, which was reported to the police. No one showed up. No one showed up to do a mental health check. No one showed up to see, does this person who is threatening to do something extreme and threatening suicide, do they have weapons at their disposal? There were alarm bells, and we're seeing that over and over again. There's alarm bells in these cases. And that kind of brings me to the next point here. And that is 2/3 of mass shootings are actually linked to domestic violence. So most mass shootings that happen in this country are interpersonal violence. That's when more than 5 people are killed in a shooting at one time. So most of this is domestic violence situations. And I sure as hell am not hearing Tucker Carlson talk about that. I'm not hearing the mainstream media talking about that. I'm not hearing anyone talk about that. The fact that one of the main issues with mass shootings in this country, the people that are being killed, are related and linked directly to interpersonal domestic violence, almost always a female being abused and, a male romantic partner, husband, whatever it might be. It's so frequent that the majority of shootings in this country, one of the top leading unexpected death of women in this country is is gun violence against females, and almost all of that is domestic violence related in our country, as you can see by this chart here. And let's see, I can't see. Oh, this is from the U.S. Census Bureau, from the census. We are this disproportionately greater in amounts of violence, gun violence against women. And again, the number one link in mass shootings in this country is domestic violence. Tucker Carlson isn't talking about that. Instead, he wants to foment and raise his hands up and blame the trans community. And then I have one more piece of information here to share with you guys. And this is to kind of talk about what I was talking about before with how unpopular these anti-trans bills are. It's all wrapped into the way people are responding to this shooting. It's all wrapped into what's happening at our state houses right now. The 435 pieces of legislation being attempted to be passed this year. Aaron in the Morning is a great resource for following what's happening with these anti-LGBTQ bills, particularly anti-trans bills, but others as well. A new NPR PBS poll shows that the majority of American public opposes criminalized gender care for under 18. This includes independents who oppose. And keep in mind that half of our country identifies as independents. Only a quarter identify as Republican, the other quarter identify as Democrat, and a full half of the country identify as independent. These bills are not popular. Drag bans are even more unpopular at 58 to 39%. America does not support this. And much of the polling that we are seeing, even in conservative media, are showing that people that identify as conservatives, because they appreciate bodily autonomy, because they appreciate parental autonomy, are against these bills. Yet someone like Tucker Carlson is fomenting fear and is not addressing the real problems, which are access to guns, mental health, evaluations of folks that come forward. And I will add this to the stream here really quick. And that is the article about who I mentioned earlier when Lewis was still on with us. Josh Hawley, Senator Josh Hawley in Nashville, or Missouri, excuse me. Senator from Missouri. He is now calling for the shooting in Nashville to be considered a hate crime. Now, in my opinion, and this isn't a legal opinion, if the shooting was specifically targeting Christians and targeting them for a religion, then yes, it could be considered a hate crime. Targeting people for their religious beliefs, targeting people for, their, certain ways that they identify, such as the hate crimes that have risen against the trans community. Those are hate crimes. So yeah, I might agree with Josh Hawley on the fact that it's a hate crime, but ironically, it is the most hypocritical thing for Josh Hawley to do. In the spring of 2001, Congress passed a bill to support hate crime victims. And this is according to the New Republic. Okay. let's see. In the spring of 2021, Congress passed a bill to support hate crimes victims and to better prevent and investigate hate crimes. It passed the Senate 94-1. Josh Hawley was the only senator to vote no. Now he wants to investigate the Nashville mass shooting as a hate crime. This legislation followed the Buffalo synagogue shoot, or the Philadelphia synagogue shooting. So when we look at that, and we look at the fact that Josh Hawley was opposed to it when folks that were pushing for this bill were often centering, anti-Semitism that's on the rise, anti-Muslim hate, and of course, protections against hate of Christians was wrapped into that as well. But Josh Hawley was against it. He was like, oh, there's no such thing as hate crimes against Jewish people. There's no such thing as hate crimes against Muslim. There's no such thing as hate crimes against indigenous people or Black people or the LGBTQ community. But in the height of hypocrisy, he is now demanding, using this language, and you see how people will co-opt it for their own political gains, using this language to say that Christians are now being targeted by the LGBTQ community, when, as I said, it's a very small theocratic pocket in this country with a lot of money, and then they're very loud, who are attempting to pass anti-LGBTQ legislation that is extremely unpopular, even in quote unquote red states that aren't even that red or aren't even a color at all, because most people in those states identify as independent, and most of these seats in this state are unchallenged. There's a whole mythology, there's a whole culture war, and what is most disgusting to me is that the narratives of mass shootings are being used to perpetuate those on whichever side of the aisle, instead of focusing on gun laws that could help, on mental health that could help, on addressing domestic violence when 1 in 2 women in this country face some kind of physical form of domestic violence or sexual assault in their lifetime. We have a crisis there, and it accounts for 2/3 of the mass shootings in this country. And that's not even addressed. So that's what I got for you guys. I'm going to go through the comments here. And this is, I will say, this is why, and I am a journalist, but I have been an organizer for many years, but this is why I'll say that people should run for local office, run for the state house. Don't like the book bans? Hell, they come home with the form, fill it out for every book you could think of. Fill it out for the Bible. Some guy did that in Florida last week. Do whatever you can in order to combat these insane fascistic laws, legalizing kidnapping and all kinds of other insanity. We have to stand up and we have to say something about it, or communities like the LGBTQ community and the rest of us are going to be losing rights to medical care, rights to protecting our children. We shouldn't have to live in fear like that. And there's no reason for it other than, people wanting to imprint their will on others through theocracy. And there's supposed to be separation of church and state. So this is absolutely ludicrous and insane. Let me see here. Dave D. Tucker is CIA. Yes, Cheryl, that is a really good point. The shooter was under doctor care and was under medication. And during that time, they were under medication for psychotic thoughts and depression, is my understanding. And under that time, they were able to purchase 2 of the firearms and several of the rounds that they purchased. So there is no ability to check that. There used to be a registry for domestic violence perpetrators, and there are still now in just a very few handful of states, but most of those have been gutted as well. So if someone commits a violent crime or domestic violence, there is no checks for that for them to be able to buy weapons. There's also no training, no evaluations that are done whatsoever. And my family own guns. They go out, they go hunting. You know, I'm Appalachian and I'm poor. You know, we've lived on venison in order to eat through the winter, for instance. But also most of them support people learning how to handle things safely. They don't support people just walking around with AK-47s. They support people getting trainings. They support stopgaps for violent crimes, for mental health issues, and others. And these are gun owners. And most gun owners agree that we need common sense gun legislation like this, which would actually prevent a lot of these instances. Did you mean to say clucker? Did I say clucker? Chris, it's a good thing I didn't say fucker, because that's really what I was thinking. Let's see. I am looking here because I love when you guys share. Okay. Seeing if there's any questions. Tangerine, Christians have often been targets of LGBTQ hatred. I don't know about that. I mean, I'm sure that sometimes that can happen, but what I see most of the time are people that are supporting things like these anti-trans legislation that we're having right now. They're supporting things like anti-gay marriage. Why the hell do you care who marries who? What's that any of your damn business? If that's your belief system, fine. You don't do it. You don't marry someone who's the same sex or the same gender. But if someone else wants to, why the hell do you care? And that's part of the problem. It's not hatred against Christians. It's an issue with people wanting to infringe their religion legislatively onto others. Legislatively onto others. I was a libertarian for 10 years. I was staunchly against that. I supported separation of church and state. You know, support civil liberties. You know, I supported gay marriage back then because I support people being able to do what they want to do. In that instance, they're not harming anybody else. They're getting married to each other. It's really nobody's damn business as far as I'm concerned. It's the same as somebody, you know, conversion therapy, pushing kids or teenagers into conversion therapy. That's placing your will on someone else's right to exist. There's a difference. So when that happens and someone gets defensive and they push back because you're pushing back on their right to just be and live in peace, then that's slightly that's a different dynamic. That's more defensive than it is hate. I'm not saying that there isn't anti-Christian hate. I've seen that. It's just, to me, that's a lot less frequent than all of this other messaging that we're seeing all the time from talking heads, the most watched show in the country, Tucker Carlson. And I don't see Christians getting their rights taken away. I don't see them not being able to go to church on Sundays. I don't see them being able to not get on the internet and share that they're Christian, share pictures of the cross, share that they want to, you know, save people or whatever it might be, inviting people to their church. I don't see this. You know, maybe people will, you know, give you a little bit of hell and you'll get a little trolling online sometimes. We all go through that. But you still have the right to say it. You still have the right, the actual rights to practice. Okay. Let's see here if there's anyone else. Oh, that's true. Aggravated progressive. That's really funny. There was a school teacher who wrote a complaint about the sexual nature of the context within the Bible in order to request that it be removed from schoolhouses, because all kinds of books were removed from the school. Books like I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings from Maya Angelou. Books like Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. So a litany of books that we've all read growing up that have cultural value to them. Any parent in Florida, in multiple school districts, but now statewide because of DeSantis' latest bill, can complain about books and have them reviewed by a board and have them removed. If they have any violent content that may seem sexual, that, all these parameters listed. So this guy complained about the Bible because guess what? The Bible is full of violence. It's full of sexual content. So should be interesting to see how that shakes out. But that's what he did. And I think that that's an interesting way to maybe show the hypocrisy and show there's nothing wrong with making sure that things are factual. And, of course, we don't want literal pornography in our school. But when you're going around banning Anne Frank, the Diary of Anne Frank, which is happening in schoolhouses in Florida, that's insane. Let's see here. And one thing that you guys can do to help anyone that's on, we will be doing more on the ground journalism. It was amazing that how much today, how much information that I heard Lewis saying. Like, I try to keep track of it as best I can. That's why I go to Status Coup. Let's see, StatusCoup.substack.com. You can find Lewis's article there. He has a lot of what he spoke on the show today about the testing in the region, about the dioxins, about what happened at the council meeting in this article. Right now, as he had mentioned on the show earlier, he's been on the phone with, people from the EPA, with scientists and experts and community members, trying to piece together what's happening with this testing, what's happening, how the independent testing is shaking out versus the testing that Norfolk Southern is doing with a company, CTEH, which is actually a criminal company that covers for companies that like Norfolk Southern, BP Oil, and others that have massive ecological disasters that harm the community. That's what CTEH does, is it comes in and it fudges the numbers. So it's really important to keep an eye on what Norfolk Southern is doing. StatusCoup.substack.com. And also, it helps when we have folks join. We've had a couple new members today, so thank you. You can also subscribe, all the whole thing. Hit the notification button, share it out, or don't, but it would be great if you did, because then it helps to get these stories out. And we're going to be doing more on the ground. Today we had a Starbucks worker on. We were talking about the Starbucks committee hearing. We were one of the first on the ground covering the Starbucks union push across the country, starting in Buffalo, New York, and in Washington State. So we were on the ground. We were interviewing folks about that. So please go to statuscoup.com/join. It is expensive to get on the ground. It costs tens of thousands of dollars just for hotel room, travel, gas. And then, yes, we pay our reporters a living wage. They're not getting rich off of it, but we pay our reporters a living wage, as it should be. And so that helps to support them as well. And as I had said, hit that notification button, like, subscribe, help to get the word out. You can follow us at statuscoup.com on Twitter, or at StatusCoup on Twitter. And I thank you guys so much for everyone that's joined us. And we'll be seeing you tomorrow. We are going to be having an episode tomorrow of the Right Wing Insanity Report from Tina Desiree Berg. And she's amazing. She's going to be covering some happenings on that are quite interesting. So you guys might want to check that out. We also have, we'll have Tina and Ron tomorrow as usual, and they are both amazing. So stay tuned for, I also have a news story rolling out about mistreatment of Amazon workers that I should be getting out later on this week, as I'm still talking to the workers and still waiting on word from Amazon as well. So please stay tuned. We have a lot of stories breaking. We're going to be covering a lot more, and we're looking to get Lewis back on the ground, Jordan on the ground, possibly me on the ground, Tina back on the ground. So yeah, stay tuned for updates. Thank you guys for joining. Love y'all and have a good night.